Married against her will to a cold doctor. What he did next shocked her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And before we start, where are you watching from today? Please drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She stood perfectly still at the end of the aisle, her fingers clenched so tightly around the white fabric of her wedding dress that her knuckles turned pale. The church was quiet, almost painfully so, broken only by the soft echo of footsteps and the distant hum of traffic outside. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it felt like an execution dressed in lace. Her name was Evelyn Carter, and this marriage was never her choice. At the altar stood the man she was about to marry, Dr. Adrian Hale, one of the youngest and most respected cardiac surgeons in the state. 35 years old, cold eyes, perfect posture, a reputation built on saving lives while never letting anyone close enough to touch his own heart. He did not smile when he saw her. He did not look nervous. He did not look in love. He looked the same way he did in the hospital corridors, calm, distant, clinical, as if this wedding were just another procedure he needed to complete before moving on to the next case. Evelyn swallowed hard. Just 6 months ago, her life had been simple. Not easy, but honest. She worked 2 jobs, one at a small cafe near the freeway and another cleaning offices at night. She counted every dollar. She measured groceries carefully. She worried about rent, gas prices, and whether her mother's medication would run out before the next paycheck came in. Then her mother collapsed. A ruptured aneurysm, emergency surgery, intensive care, machines that never slept, bills that climbed faster than she could read them. The doctors spoke in careful tones, using words like critical and unstable, while the hospital finance office spoke in numbers that made her stomach drop. That was when Dr. Adrian Hale entered her life, not as a savior, not as a lover, but as a solution. He offered to cover every medical expense, every bill, every follow-up treatment. In exchange, Evelyn would become his wife. Not in love, not in spirit, only on paper. A contract marriage. No affection, no questions. No interference in his work or his life. She remembered his exact words that night, spoken in a quiet office with glass walls and dim lights. This arrangement benefits us both. Feelings are unnecessary. Feelings only make people weak. Evelyn had wanted to scream, to refuse, to walk out and let pride destroy her family. But then she remembered her mother lying unconscious, surrounded by machines she could not afford. So she signed. Now she was here. As the officiant began to speak, Evelyn forced herself to look at Adrian. His face was unreadable, his hands steady. When he repeated his vows, his voice did not waver. When it was her turn, her voice shook just enough for her to notice, but not enough for anyone else to question. I do. The words felt heavy, permanent, binding. When the ceremony ended, there was polite applause. Cameras flashed. Guests whispered about how lucky she was to marry such a brilliant doctor, about how secure her future must be now. No one saw the truth. No one saw that this marriage had begun without love, without warmth, without choice. As Adrian turned to her, his voice low and controlled, he said only one thing. We will discuss the terms again when we get home. And in that moment, Evelyn realized something chilling. This was not the beginning of a love story. This was the beginning of a contract that would test how much a human heart could endure before it finally broke. The house Adrian brought her to that night did not feel like a home. It was large, quiet, and spotless, perched in a gated neighborhood where the lawns were trimmed weekly and the lights turned on automatically at sunset. Every surface gleamed. Every room smelled faintly of disinfectant and expensive wood polish. Evelyn followed him inside, her footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. She still wore her wedding dress, the weight of it pressed against her shoulders, heavy and unfamiliar, like a reminder she could not take off. Adrian removed his jacket with precise movements and placed it neatly over a chair. He loosened his tie, not in exhaustion, but in routine, the same way a surgeon prepared before washing his hands. "You will have the guest room," he said calmly. "It is down the hall, second door on the left." She nodded, though something twisted in her chest. This was no interference in his professional decisions. Her throat tightened. She remembered the night this contract had first appeared in front of her. It was 3 weeks after her mother's surgery. The doctors had stabilized her, but the bills had already begun to arrive. Thick envelopes, bold numbers, language she did not fully understand, except for the total at the bottom of each page. She had sat alone in the hospital cafeteria, staring at a cup of cold coffee she could not afford to refill, when Adrian approached her table. He had not offered condolences. He had not offered comfort. He had offered clarity. "Your insurance will not cover the remaining procedures," he said evenly, "and your income, based on your records, will not be sufficient." She had looked up at him, shocked. "How do you know that?" "Because I checked," he replied. That was when she realized he was not just a doctor. He was a man who controlled systems, who moved through power quietly, efficiently, without apology. "I can solve this," he had continued, "but not without terms." Now, sitting in his living room, Evelyn felt the weight of those terms pressing down on her chest. "You are free to leave this marriage at any time," Adrian said, his voice steady. "The financial obligations to your mother will remain fulfilled. This is not a trap." She laughed softly, a sound that surprised even her. "It already feels like one," she said. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, not regret, something closer to recognition. "This arrangement protects us both," he replied. "You needed help. I needed stability. That is all." Evelyn closed the folder. She thought of her mother waking up in a clean hospital room, pain managed, nurses attentive. She thought of the fear she had felt every night before this deal, wondering if tomorrow would bring another bill she could not pay. She stood slowly. "I understand," she said. That was a lie, but it was the only answer she could give. As she walked toward the guest room, the silence of the house followed her. Each step felt heavier than the last. She lay down on the bed, still dressed in white, staring up at a ceiling that felt impossibly far away. This marriage had saved her mother's life, but as sleep finally took her, one question echoed quietly in her mind. How much would it cost her to survive it? Morning came quietly in Adrian Hale's house. No alarm rang. No voices echoed through the halls. The sunlight filtered in through tall windows, landing softly on polished floors that reflected no warmth. Evelyn woke slowly, disoriented for a moment, until the events of the night before settled back into her chest like a familiar weight. She was married, and she was alone. After changing out of her dress and into borrowed clothes neatly folded on the bed, she followed the sound of movement down the hallway. The kitchen was immaculate, stainless steel surfaces, no clutter, no scent of food, only the sharp, clean smell of coffee brewing. Adrian stood at the counter, reading something on his tablet. He looked exactly as he had the day before, composed, controlled, already dressed for work in a crisp white shirt and dark slacks. "You should eat," he said without looking up. "There is food in the refrigerator." Evelyn sat at the table, her hands resting in her lap. She did not feel hungry. Before she could speak, Adrian placed another folder in front of her, thicker this time, legal. "Final. These are the finalized terms," he said. "We should clarify expectations now. It avoids complications later." She stared at the folder, then up at him. "We already signed." "Yes," he replied, "but marriages tend to create assumptions. I prefer clarity." She opened it slowly. The rules were written in precise language, stripped of emotion. They would live under the same roof, but lead separate lives. They would present a united front in public. There would be no questions about where he went or what he did. No scenes, no jealousy, no attachments. She paused, her finger tracing a single line. No physical relationship required. Adrian noticed her hesitation. "That clause is for your protection as much as mine," he said evenly. "This marriage is not built on desire." Evelyn let out a small breath. "You really believe feelings complicate everything, do you?" "They do," he answered without hesitation. "They cloud judgment. They lead to mistakes." She thought of the night her mother collapsed, of the panic, the fear, the way love had driven her to beg strangers for help. "Sometimes feelings are the only reason people survive," she said quietly. Adrian looked at her then, really looked at her. For a brief moment, the distance in his eyes shifted. "Survival does not require affection," he said. "It requires discipline." The words stung more than she expected. She closed the folder. "So this is it," she said. "I am your wife in name, a guest in your house, a stranger in your life. He nodded once. That is the agreement. And if I break the rules? Then this arrangement ends, he replied, peacefully. Something about that calm certainty unsettled her. Do you ever wonder, she asked, what it would feel like to live without rules? Adrian picked up his keys. Rules are what keep people from falling apart. He walked toward the door, then paused. My schedule is demanding, he added. Do not wait up for me. And Evelyn, she looked up. This marriage will not hurt you. That I can promise. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality. Evelyn sat alone at the table long after he left, staring at the empty chair across from her. She had agreed to this marriage to save her mother's life. She had accepted a life of silence and boundaries in exchange for security. But as she looked around the cold, perfect kitchen, one thought pressed heavily against her heart. If feelings were forbidden here, how long could a human heart last before it started to break the rules on its own? Days began to pass, measured not by conversation, but by absence. Adrian left the house before sunrise most mornings, his footsteps quiet, his presence efficient and fleeting. Evelyn would hear the door close, then the familiar silence would settle in again, wrapping the house like a second skin. The rooms were always clean, always orderly. Nothing ever felt lived in. She learned his routine without trying to. Coffee at exactly 6:15, lights off in the hallway by 6:30. No notes, no messages, no signs that anyone would return. At first, Evelyn tried to make herself smaller, quieter, as if that would help her blend into the life she had been placed inside. She spent hours in the guest room, unpacking and repacking the same few belongings she had brought with her. She folded clothes that did not need folding. She stared out the windows at neighbors walking dogs, laughing, living lives that felt impossibly far away. In the evenings, Adrian came home late. Sometimes she heard his car pull into the driveway close to midnight. Sometimes it was closer to 2 in the morning. She never waited up, just as he had instructed. But she noticed things anyway. The faint smell of antiseptic on his hands when he passed her in the hallway. The exhaustion in his shoulders that no amount of discipline could fully hide. They shared the same space, but rarely the same air. One night, she sat at the long dining table alone, a simple plate of food untouched in front of her. When Adrian entered, loosening his tie, he paused briefly. You did not eat, he observed. I lost my appetite, she replied. He nodded, as if that explained everything, and poured himself a glass of water. He did not sit down. He did not ask why. Another evening, she noticed a cut on his hand, hastily bandaged. You are hurt, she said softly. It is nothing, he replied. She wanted to ask what had happened. She wanted to ask how his day had been. But the rules echoed in her mind, clear and unforgiving. No questions, no interference, so she said nothing. Yet slowly, despite the walls he had built, she began to notice the cracks. He never spoke harshly to hospital staff on the phone. His voice was firm, but respectful. When he thought he was alone, she once saw him standing by the window, eyes closed, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if carrying a weight no one else could see. He was not cruel, he was guarded. One afternoon, while folding laundry in the shared utility room, Evelyn overheard a conversation on speakerphone. Adrian's voice was low, controlled, but something sharp cut through it. No, he said, I will not rush the procedure. A life is not a deadline. There was a pause. I do not care how influential the family is. Ethics come first. The call ended. Evelyn stood frozen, the fabric slipping from her hands. For the first time, she saw him not as the cold doctor who had bought her silence, but as a man who drew hard lines when it mattered. That night, as they passed each other in the hallway, she spoke without thinking. You are different at the hospital. He stopped. In what way? He asked. You care, she said simply. His jaw tightened. Caring and attachment are not the same thing. Maybe not, she replied, but they look similar from the outside. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he stepped aside, allowing her to pass. As she walked away, Evelyn realized something unsettling. The walls between them were still standing. The rules were still in place. But for the first time since the wedding, the silence between them felt less empty and far more dangerous. The first public appearance came sooner than Evelyn expected. Adrian informed her the morning of the event, his tone as calm as ever as if he were reminding her of a routine appointment rather than a night that would place her under 1,000 curious eyes. "There is a hospital fundraising gala tonight," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "You will attend with me." She nodded. "What time?" 7:30. A car will be waiting." That was all. By the time evening arrived, Evelyn stood in front of the mirror wearing a deep blue dress, provided by a stylist she had never met. It fit perfectly. Too perfectly. As if someone had measured her without ever asking who she was. The gala was held in a downtown hotel ballroom, filled with soft lighting, polished marble, and people who spoke easily about donations larger than her yearly income. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter echoed, names were exchanged like currency. Adrian moved through the room with effortless authority. Colleagues greeted him with respect. Board members shook his hand. Donors leaned in, eager for his attention. Evelyn stayed at his side, smiling politely, saying little. "This is Dr. Hale's wife," someone said at least a dozen times. Never Evelyn. Never her name. At one point, Adrian was pulled into a conversation with the hospital board. Evelyn stood just a few steps behind him, close enough to hear every word. "We are counting on you for the Reynolds surgery tomorrow," a man said. "The family made a very generous contribution." Adrian nodded. "I am aware." "It is high profile," another added. "The press will be watching." Evelyn felt a strange tightening in her chest. Tomorrow. She had forgotten the date, or maybe she had tried to. Tomorrow was also the day her mother was scheduled for a follow-up procedure. A minor one, the doctors had said. Routine. But Evelyn knew better than to trust words like that anymore. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Adrian," she said softly, "about tomorrow." He did not look at her. "The schedule is set," he replied. Her heart sank. The rest of the evening blurred together. People smiled at her, but their eyes assessed her, measured her worth. She overheard whispers. "She is very quiet. Do you know where she is from? I heard he married her suddenly." Each word cut deeper than the last. On the drive home, silence filled the car. "You did well tonight," Adrian said finally. "You were appropriate." Appropriate. She turned to look out the window, the city lights streaking past like distant stars. "Am I just that to you?" she asked quietly. "Appropriate?" He did not answer. When they arrived home, Evelyn went straight to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as she dialed the hospital. Her mother's nurse answered gently. Everything was still on schedule, but there had been concerns earlier. Blood pressure fluctuations, nothing serious. Yet. Evelyn ended the call and stared at the wall. For the first time since the wedding, the truth settled fully in her chest. She had entered this marriage believing she was protected. But standing in that ballroom, watching Adrian choose his career, his reputation, and his obligations without hesitation, she realized something devastating. In his world, she came after everything else. And tomorrow, she would find out just how far down the list she truly was. Evelyn barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the ballroom again. The way people leaned toward Adrian with admiration. The way he nodded, decisive and calm, while she stood behind him, invisible. By morning, her chest felt tight, her thoughts heavy with a fear she could not quiet. Her phone rang just after 6. The hospital. She answered on the first ring. "Miss Carter," the nurse said gently, "your mother has been moved into preoperative care earlier than planned. There were some complications overnight. The doctor would like to proceed as soon as possible." Evelyn sat up, her heart racing. "Is she going to be okay?" "We are monitoring her closely," the nurse replied. "But she is anxious. She keeps asking for you." Evelyn did not waste another second. She dressed quickly and left the house without waking Adrian. By the time she reached the hospital, the hallways were already busy. Stretchers moved past her. Machines beeped steadily. The familiar smell of antiseptic wrapped around her like a warning. Her mother lay pale beneath white sheets, eyes tired but alert. "You came," her mother whispered, relief washing over her face. "I am here," Evelyn said, squeezing her hand. "I am not going anywhere." Outside the room, doctors spoke in hushed voices. One of them mentioned Adrian's name. "Doctor, Hale is scheduled for the Reynolds surgery this morning," a nurse said quietly. "But we need his input on this case." Evelyn felt the words hit her like a blow. High profile, press watching, donors waiting. She stepped back, her heart pounding. She did not call Adrian. She did not ask for his help. She told herself she already knew the answer. Hours passed. Then suddenly, the air in the corridor shifted. People stopped walking. Voices lowered. A ripple of surprise moved through the staff. "Did you hear?" Someone whispered. "Dr. Hale canceled the Reynolds surgery." "That is impossible," another replied. "That case is huge." Evelyn froze. She turned just as Adrian appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression focused, his pace unhurried. He was not wearing his surgical gloves. He was not heading toward the operating room reserved for the wealthy family everyone had been discussing. He was walking toward her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I was called," he replied simply. "But the Reynolds surgery," she said. "They are expecting you." He met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "They will have another surgeon." "You cannot just cancel," she whispered. "Your career, your reputation." "I am aware," he said. A doctor approached him urgently. "Dr. Hale, the board is demanding an explanation." "They will receive one," Adrian replied. "Later." He turned back to Evelyn. "Your mother needs me now." The words stunned her. "But you said feelings make people weak," she said softly. "You said this marriage was just an arrangement." "This is not about feelings," he answered. "This is about choosing what matters." For the first time since she met him, his voice wavered. "I will not lose another patient because I chose convenience over responsibility." Tears blurred Evelyn's vision as Adrian scrubbed in, preparing for a surgery no one had expected him to take. Outside the operating room, whispers spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed. Messages were sent. He was risking everything. And in that moment, as the doors closed and she waited alone in the corridor, Evelyn realized something she had never dared to hope. The cold doctor who had once treated her life like a transaction had just made a choice no contract could explain. The surgery lasted longer than expected. Evelyn sat in the hard plastic chair outside the operating room, her hands clasped so tightly together that her fingers ached. Every few minutes, a nurse walked past, offering polite reassurance without details. Time stretched, heavy and merciless. Around her, the consequences of Adrian's decision were already unfolding. Phones rang non-stop at the nurses' station. Doctors whispered in tense clusters. A senior administrator paced back and forth, his expression darkening with every update he received. "He really canceled it," someone murmured. "The Reynolds family is furious. The board is demanding an emergency meeting." Evelyn heard it all, and with every word, guilt pressed deeper into her chest. This was her fault. If she had not needed him, if she had not been here, if she had not become his wife. At last, the operating room doors opened. Adrian stepped out, his face drawn with exhaustion, his surgical cap removed, his hands still trembling slightly from the strain. He pulled down his mask, and their eyes met. "She is stable," he said quietly. "The procedure went well." Evelyn stood so quickly she nearly lost her balance. Relief crashed over her, sharp and overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved her." Adrian shook his head. "I did my job." Before she could respond, two men in dark suits approached them, their expressions rigid and controlled. "Dr. Hale," one of them said, "the hospital board is waiting for you, now." Adrian nodded once. "Give me a moment." They did not look pleased, but they stepped aside. Evelyn followed him a few steps down the hallway. "They are angry," she said. "You know that." "Yes," he replied. "You could lose everything," she continued. "Your position, your reputation." He stopped and turned to her. "For years," Adrian said slowly, "I believed control was the only thing that kept chaos away. That if I never allowed myself to care, I would never make the wrong choice." His voice lowered. "I was wrong." She searched his face, seeing not the cold surgeon she had married, but a man standing at the edge of something he could not undo. "I lost someone once," he continued. "A patient. I chose a prestigious case over an urgent one. The board praised me. The press applauded. And a woman died." Evelyn's breath caught. "That was the day I stopped believing feelings had value," he said. "That was the day I decided never to let my heart interfere again." She reached for his hand without thinking. "And today?" she asked softly. "Today," he said, I chose differently. The doors to the conference room loomed ahead of him. Voices echoed from inside, tense, demanding. This marriage was supposed to be simple, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. A contract, no emotions, no risk. Adrian met her gaze. It stopped being simple the moment you walked into my life, he replied. Then he gently withdrew his hand and straightened his shoulders. No matter what happens in that room, he said, I do not regret my choice. As the doors closed behind him, Evelyn stood alone in the hallway, heart pounding. For the first time since the wedding, the truth was undeniable. This was no longer just a contract under threat. It was a marriage standing in the open, about to be judged by the world, and by the man who had finally chosen to face his own heart. The meeting lasted over an hour. Evelyn remained seated outside the conference room, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap, as if holding herself together through sheer will. Staff members passed by, casting curious glances in her direction. Some recognized her from the gala. Others whispered, already forming conclusions she could not hear. She did not move. When the doors finally opened, Adrian stepped out alone. His face revealed nothing at first. No anger, no relief, only a quiet heaviness that settled in his shoulders, as if something invisible had been placed there. They have suspended me from lead surgical duties, he said calmly. Pending review. Evelyn stood. Because of me. Because of my decision, he corrected. They will not forgive you easily, she said. The Reynolds family has influence. I know. For a moment neither of them spoke. The hospital hallway felt colder than before, stripped of urgency now that the crisis had passed. Adrian reached into his jacket and removed the familiar beige folder, the contract. He placed it gently into her hands. This no longer serves its purpose, he said. Her fingers tightened around it. What do you mean? You agreed to marry me because you had no choice, he continued. Because I offered protection when you needed it most. That was the agreement, she said. You kept your part. And now I am asking you to choose, he replied. Her heart skipped. I will continue covering your mother's care, he said. That will not change. But this marriage, it should not be a prison. She searched his face, trying to understand what he was offering. I am not asking you to stay, he said quietly. If you want to leave, I will sign whatever papers are necessary. No conditions, no penalties. Slowly, deliberately, he took the folder from her hands and tore it in half. The sound echoed softly between them. Then again, and again. He dropped the torn pages into the trash beside the wall. For years, Adrian said, his voice low, I hid behind rules because they kept me safe, because they allowed me to pretend I was in control. He looked at her, truly looked at her. But when I stood in that operating room today, knowing what I might lose, I realized something. Evelyn held her breath. I did not choose you because of obligation, he said. I chose you because I could not live with myself if I did not. Tears welled in her eyes. And now, he continued, I want to know the truth. Not as my wife on paper, not as part of a deal. He paused. Do you want to stay? The question hung between them, fragile and terrifying. Evelyn thought of the guest room, the silence, the loneliness, the contract that had once protected her but slowly erased her voice. She thought of the way he had stood up to the board, the way he had walked away from everything he had built. She took a step back, then another. Adrian did not stop her, but she did not leave. Instead, she looked him in the eyes and spoke through the tremor in her voice. I will not stay because I owe you, she said, and I will not stay because you saved my mother. She took a breath. If I stay, it will be because this is no longer a transaction. Adrian nodded once. That is all I ask. For the first time since they married, the future between them was no longer written in ink. It was waiting for a choice. Evelyn did not leave the hospital that day. She sat beside her mother's bed until evening, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, watching color slowly return to her mother's face. When her mother opened her eyes and smiled weakly, Evelyn felt something loosen inside her chest for the first time in months. He stayed, her mother whispered. The doctor. He did not leave. Evelyn nodded. No, he did not. That night, she returned to the house on the hill. The lights were on when she arrived. Adrian was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, staring at nothing in particular. He looked tired in a way that went beyond lack of sleep. This was the exhaustion of a man who had finally stopped running from himself. You came back, he said quietly. Yes, Evelyn replied. I wanted to talk. They sat across from each other at the long table that had once felt like a border between strangers. The silence this time was different. It did not press down. It waited. "I do not want the guest room anymore," she said. Adrian inhaled slowly. "I understand if you need time." "That is not what I mean," she continued. "I want this to be real, or not at all." He looked at her carefully. "Real means uncertainty." "I know." "Real means I will fail sometimes," he said. "I will not always know how to be what you need." She met his gaze. "Neither will I." For the first time, he smiled. Not the polite expression he used in public. Something softer, something unsure. Weeks passed. The hospital board completed their review. Adrian was not fired. His privileges were restored slowly, with conditions. The press moved on. Scandals always did. What remained was quieter, more permanent. They began again, not as doctor and obligation, but as two people learning the unfamiliar language of honesty. They cooked together, awkwardly at first, burned food, laughed at mistakes. She learned he liked silence in the mornings because it gave him space to think. He learned she talked when she was nervous, not because she wanted to fill the room, but because she was afraid of disappearing inside it. One evening, months later, Adrian came home early. "I asked for tomorrow off," he said. She looked up, surprised. "You never take days off." "I am learning," he replied. He reached into his pocket and placed something small on the table. Not a ring, a simple folded piece of paper. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. No conditions, no contracts, no obligations. Just one question. "Will you marry me again?" he asked softly. "This time because you choose me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes," she said, "but only if you promise one thing." "Anything." "No more hiding behind rules," she said, "and no more choosing power over people." He nodded. "I promise." They did not plan a grand wedding. There was no ballroom, no donors, no cameras. Just a small ceremony in a quiet garden, her mother watching with tears in her eyes, and a handful of people who mattered. When Evelyn walked toward Adrian this time, she was not afraid. There was no contract waiting to be signed, only hands reaching for each other. As they stood together, Evelyn realized the truth she had been afraid to believe. The marriage that began as a transaction had ended as a choice. And sometimes, the strongest love is not the one that comes easily, but the one that survives, when walking away would have been simpler.